Soybeans
Right.
falling double digits. That's the issue we are going to discuss with Jerry Gidel right here on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. If you are new here, make sure you subscribe. So, Jerry, how are you today? Let's start talking about soybeans. And we had a double digit fall today. What happened in your opinion?
Well, this week we had a little bit of a post-report bounce in this thing, and then we kind of had a slippage going into this weekend because of some pre-weekend hedging was part of it. There wasn't a lot of new news floating around here about crop sizes, things like that. That actually was some of the features here after the USDA report of last week. We, of course, had a little less than expected kind of numbers there to some extent. And that gave us a little bit of a start there late last week on Friday. And then it continued for the first 2 or 3 days of this week with people's concerns really about Eastern Corn Belt's yields, particularly on corn. That it really there seemed to be a lot of people noticing the tops out of a lot of corn acres in central Illinois that actually had been impacted by this disease issues here. If you think back on things this summer, basically there was a pretty substantial rain event just before the 4th of July. And in that situation, there was, 10 and 12 inches, 15 inches of rain in a very short period of time. And that kind of really set the tone here for took the edge off of people's concerns about yields. But at the same time, that did end up creating a wet environment. And at the same time, we had a lot of warm nights, and warm nights with moisture in the air, high humidities can cause some disease issues to start to spread. Our little tour that we had on 1st of August didn't show up a lot of that, but I heard a lot of people talking about it later on. And then with the tops of the of the corn plants starting to break out, in essence, just the stock quality became pretty poor. And that doesn't mean the ears fell off, but it just is just indication of issues with the fill of the corn. So that ended up getting some good play through Wednesday, and that this, and then things kind of went on a sideways to downward total here, be it the weekly exports.
Yes, and what can you say about the corn side of things?
Well, yeah, the soybeans and corn side both have taken a drift there a little bit on people's attitudes on what expectations might be happening. The soybeans, interestingly enough, the Eastern Corn Belt tends to harvest a lot of their corn, a certain portion of it before we end up having beans, and that versus the western parts of the U.S. has more beans. We didn't even have a U.S. soybean harvest number last week. We might get one this week. We are at 4% on U.S. corn. Most of that really was in the south, Delta areas, things like that, southeast. So there really wasn't a lot of Midwest stuff going. It's going to be interesting, though, what there's expectations. Things are going to jump this weekend. Of course, that's why we had a little of this pre-hedge that happened to hit the markets today. I wonder if how much, though, the producer's going to be selling here. They'll be delivering against corn contracts, but I don't think there'll be any additional sales across the scales here that will put some additional pressure on the corn here early next week.
In this week, one purchase from China has caught the attention that they are purchasing more from Brazil in an unusual time.
Yes, yes, that was one of the things that grabbed the kept soybeans on somewhat of a sluggish tone, even from versus the corn midweek, was the fact that, well, what's happened here with the, I think a lot of foreign buyers, and particularly Chinese here, have anticipated they could be able to get some better deals here going right ahead of harvest, with the harvest in the U.S. happening. But now all of a sudden, with the Gulf been shut down for 2 weeks already, and maybe it's going to be on for, well, it's not going to be back to full strength here probably for another month. We've had quite a few of the elevators come back online, but two of the bigger ones that are involved here, the Cargill facility at Reserve, and then there's another one from from a big co-op called CH S out of Minnesota, have really out of commission. So when these late buyers were looking around, uh, there wasn't any capabilities to buy some stuff, because some people that got postponed on in September are now going to be in October. So there wasn't a lot of what they call elevation space in the Gulf. And at the same time, the Pacific Northwest didn't, the other area that the Chinese export a lot of soybeans from, didn't have any beans because of the fact that they've been already shipped out, and the harvest hadn't started. Now, I've heard some things today that there's some pretty aggressive bids from various locations up there to put together some unit trains to go out to the Pacific Northwest to get some more supplies out there. But in the short term, when these buyers were looking around, they or they were concerned about the purchases that they'd already bought, because there was a combination of them buying, I heard, somewhere between 5 and 7 cargoes of beans in Brazil, and then they canceled some U.S. Purchases they made, which is kind of interesting in the fact that if they're uh, other people have been buying right along here on one every day. We've been getting a cargo or two of sales going to China or unknown destination this week. So I was kind of surprised that I think there was a play in there to see if they could, and they did get the soybean markets a little defensive for Tuesday, I think it was, when that occurred. But then as people realized that the demand was still there, they just was shifting it from one place to the other. They didn't end up getting as concerned about the cancellations in the U.S. and the fact that the other people are going ahead and buying, and at the same time, the fact that at this point, at least, the big unknown with China right now going through this coming year is a lot more involving the corn purchases, and they've got a lot of corn purchases on the books right now. Beans are a little bit behind last year's totals at this point, so I think a lot of people are not being totally concerned that the Chinese aren't going to be a big buyer this fall. But I think the purchases they made out of Brazil, by the way, is pretty well limited additional sales out of that location for the rest of this fall after the recent purchases that the Chinese made.
Now, what we are seeing about the U.S. crop yields is that it is ranging a lot from region to region, and ranging a lot according to each analyst you hear. So, especially in the case of corn, how do you assess that?
Well, I've always been a little conservative about people's expectations here on this year's corn yield because of our uh, pre-pollination conditions in the U.S. up until that we talked about this big rain that happened in Illinois and parts of the Eastern Corn Belt around 4th of July. Up until that point, we were still in a pretty dry regime, and the Western Corn Belt continued that in a big way until maybe August in parts of Iowa and that. But I don't know. I guess the one thing that bothers me right now is they projected some pretty hefty ideas for Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and record yields by, well, not Illinois' case, 4 bushels. I think Indiana was approaching 7 or 8 bushels. Same thing with Ohio. I guess the interesting thing, you can see I'm not in my normal spot here. I did come down to see some relatives here in Louisville, Kentucky, and turns up I took a drive through, well, kind of the south of Chicago down through some rural areas and that to north of Lafayette, and then took the interstate from there through Indianapolis and down to Louisville. And I'd have to say that I was really a couple different things. The crop that I did see was solid to some extent. Actually, my trip that I did take back there on 1st of September down to Decatur, I was surprised by the maturity of the crop. The maturity of crop in general on corn was moving along, but it wasn't all that surprising to me. The soybeans, the northern part of that trip to just, I'd say 30, 25, 30 miles north of Lafayette, the crops were just turning on soybeans, things like that. But I ran into a very significant portion of Indiana's corn crop from south of Lafayette on through until 20 or 30 miles south of Indianapolis. There's a big stretch in there of all city, but turns out that there's some beans that were in the brown stick situation, no green leaves, no dry down situation going on there. So beans are maturing pretty fast. And usually what happens in that case, you don't have as good yields because there's not as much put into the seeds, but we'll have to see. I think that's the whole key feature. You're talking about variability and things like that from various people. And that I'd have to say that we really haven't got a good handle of what's really happening west of the Mississippi yet. And I think that's the real crucial area. Of course, we've had, I think, maybe a little of the top in the eastern area taken off, but I've heard some issues out in the plain states, particularly Kansas, and that's an area that's really expanded corn and soybeans over the last 10 to 15 years. Some of those yields might not be as good from there. So at this point, I guess a little. I'm not in the idea that just because we ended up having a slight increase in the September USDA's corn crop, are we going to have a significant rise in corn yields and soybean yields as we go to the final? There has been some people pointed out that September is an important one, but I guess the one thing that bothers me about that strategy is that in the past we used to have enumerators giving us some impact in the August crop report. And so this is the first time we had their numbers this month because of financial costs that changed a couple of years ago. And so at this point, maybe that idea to watch the trends of U.S. corn and soybeans from August to September maybe should be September to October, as that being maybe a better idea because of the USDA's actual field surveys being involved in these numbers, not just the farmer survey like we had in August.
And what are you expecting for next week, or what are you watching?
Well, yeah, of course, we always this time of year kind of continue to watch what's going on with the producers out there and what they're kind of responding to here in their yields as they go along. Last week we had a 4% number on U.S. Harvested corn. I kind of believe it will probably be in that 8 to maybe 9% level, and we might even get a 1 or 2% number on soybean harvest started in these numbers, and that. So that's going to be important. Also, we continue to see how the Chinese react to these prices here at this point. I think they will be continuing to be buyers in the soybean market here, as in general, these values here, in the $12.50 to $13 mark, is still a relatively good value in that. And the same kind of mindset, I think, is important here in the December corn. If we slip below $5 before the crop report. I kind of feel like that's going to have a potentially chance for a low here on a seasonal basis, but we'll have to see how that proceeds here at that point. See what the weather looks like. It's, by the way, continuing to be above uh, normal to above on temperatures with limited moisture. So that suggests that our harvest progress this fall could start to pick up at a pretty fast pace after this in the coming week too. So that's always an interesting situation as to we get more and more updates from these combine monitors out there as people sit in their cabs and see what's going on through their things. Sometimes the calibration of those things sometimes take a little time to get working right, but it's going to be highly important. This U.S. yields this year, if we slip back from this 176 number back lower than say 174 or something like that, it really makes a huge difference on our availability of supplies going forward here. And I think the one real twist here is we're going to also have to keep a close eye on what kind of sales and shipments are coming out of Brazil. There's still a lot of controversy in my mind and other people that the USDA's and the CONAB's numbers on 86, 87 million metric tons might still be a bit on the high side. And every bushel that's not available from Brazil has to come from someplace else. And so that could be a factor here as we go forward in this fall on the world looking to the U.S. to take advantage of the harvest prices here to get their stocks and their trade levels up on a worldwide basis.
Well, thank you, Jerry, for your time here as always.
Yes. Well, it's interesting. I'm going to go back a slightly different way, so I'll have a little information on how the crops look in East Central and Northeast uh, Illinois on our way back. And so have another peek at it. This is, I've done more driving around this year than I've done in years, but I think it's going to be helpful for myself and everybody here as to what I'm just generally seeing. That doesn't mean I'm any better than anybody else driving by looking at fields, but uh, I've been looking at them for many years. So we'll see what I see.